inspiring technology, fascinating people, and captivating stories, but hopefully a combination of all three. So get ready to embrace your inner cool kid as we go behind the scenes with today's innovators and storytellers. I'm your host, Cameron Kitt, founder and CEO of Yo-Yo's, a documentary storytelling company. And today I have the privilege of chatting with Vicki Shabo, the awesome senior fellow at New America who's focused on gender equity and the founder of the entertainment initiative at the Better Life Lab, which is called Rescripting Gender, Work, Family, and Care. Welcome, Vicki.
Thanks, Cameron. I'm really happy to be here.
So I got the privilege of seeing you talk here in New York about the work you guys are doing to engage, educate, incentivize writers in TV shows in the writers' room to talk more about care. And we had some really great examples of, for instance, the best friend of someone with a severe disability, or how things affect people with cancer. What was one of those kind of inciting incident moments for you that got you into this work? Like, tell me that story.
Well, for me, my background is actually in policy and advocacy work. So since 2010, I've been working with policymakers and advocates at the state, local, and federal levels, businesses, journalists, and others to educate audiences about the need for policies like paid family and medical leave and paid sick time, about gender pay inequity and pregnancy discrimination and other issues, about the lack of childcare that's affordable and available. And for me, the inciting impetus, I guess, to really think about entertainment narratives was the failure of policymakers, has been the failure of policymakers to adopt policies that are overwhelmingly popular among people in the United States, both voters and, according to some research we just released earlier this summer, also television viewers, who are, in fact, people living in the United States who have views. And we know that overwhelmingly across party lines, people want to see investments in childcare, in paid family and medical leave, in elder and disability care. They think that families, communities, and the economy will be stronger if we have these policies, and yet policymakers haven't passed these things for a variety of reasons. One of those is that we tend to have a very individualistic, pull yourself up by your bootstraps culture here in the US. We tend to think about work and family conflicts or struggles or the need that people have to find care for themselves or their loved ones as personal issues that are often invisible and not discussed. They tend to think of their need to take time away from work as something that's between them and their employer that they were going to be lucky to negotiate. And these are cultural frames and understandings that we really need to shift. And that brought me into the entertainment space. I've also just been a TV junkie in my life. I have strong parasocial interactions, like the research says, with characters on screen, and get really involved in shows that I watch. I think of the characters from Grey's Anatomy as my friends in Seattle and have for a long time.
Yeah.
And so really just started to think about what else did we need to do in order to get to the policy changes that people want and that the country needs. What else do we need to do? And one of those things is really helping people see that they're not alone, that their struggles are shared with millions of other people, and that collectively we can make change for solutions that can and do exist elsewhere in the world, and in fact do exist in places in the United States as well. So that's a long-winded answer to what got me into
Saying
this. But,
well, was there like a movie or show that you watched where there was like a big missed opportunity, or like, I wish they had talked more about this, that you just remember kind of cringing at, or like having some kind of resentment?
I would say not one specific thing, but I'm often struck by, watching medical shows, for example. We very rarely see any discussion of whether people who are in the hospital are missing time from work, or whether the caregivers who are with them are missing time for work or risking a job, or how they're going to make ends meet. Or, parents on screen often will like have a baby and go back to work, or they have a baby and they don't go back to work, but nobody's addressing how they're continuing
Yeah.
to afford basic
It's
expenses. And that's not one show. That's what research tells us is
it's just
like
like the
almost every show.
unspokenness of that kind of reflects American culture. One show I think is doing a really good job is The Pit, and I'm like a huge fan because having like listened to your talks, looked at your work, read your work, it makes me remember like how much we subconsciously accept as true or learn from what is like what values are reflected. And that's true of
Yeah,
sexism and racism, and like what stories are portrayed has a lot of importance. And like they had a really kind of multi episode character arc about a woman who was burnt out taking care of her mom who had dementia, multiple issues, and like really showed her breaking down. And if I remember walking away from my apartment thinking about that episode, being like, wow, it's the first time I've ever really like taken the moment to empathize. I mean, I'm somebody who had been a caregiver of an older family member with dementia, but like maybe I didn't want to empathize. But like, she had a breaking point, and they actually showed that. Like I think she
yeah,
passed out in the car. They couldn't reach her for hours. It was like very stressful.
yeah,
But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of times where those discussions are not had, and so it's as simple as
yeah,
just saying, getting. So you had this moment where you're like, we need to talk to Hollywood.
yeah,
I'm going to start this
yeah.
initiative.
And
How did that
it
go?
isn't, it's not just us. There's other organizations that do this kind of work too, whether focused specifically on care and depictions of caregiving, like our friends at Caring Across Generations, or thinking about authentic and realistic depictions of race or of immigrants. So this is something that is a tested strategy in Hollywood, although I'll put a pin in that because Hollywood itself has been changing a lot over the
Yeah.
last several years, which makes the work complicated and new and interesting. And, tried and tested methods of doing this work are needing to be reinvented in some ways. But, entertainment has a lot of power to help shape people's attitudes and behavior and engagement. We see that, in research around health and poverty, and wealth and race and other issues, LGBTQ representation, for example. And it's well, sort of in lexicon, sort of like pop culture lexicon, like the idea of Leave It to Beaver and Father Knows Best, and how the Brady Bunch and how those shows really shaped perceptions of traditional nuclear families. I think we
Mm.
just have a big opportunity now to use shows like High Potential and Matlock and The Bear, and The Neighborhood and other shows that are on network TV and on streaming platforms to shape the way that people perceive norms and standards and common lived experiences today for families, which in reality is like all adults in families with children that are working, a growing need for people both to be providing care to children and to older and disabled loved ones. Um, yeah, sort of tensions and concerns around finances and jobs that really came through in the audience research that we did, and are very clear in survey after survey in terms of how Americans are perceiving their lives and their experiences today.
It's interesting. Um, like reflecting what's already there instead of telling people what they need to know. But I have a coach who like in film was always likes to say stuff like if you say Hollywood, he's like, "Where's Hollywood? I'm sorry, who's Hollywood? Like what street is
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood?" And it's like a reminder that there is no like it's the traditional whatever the amorphous blob that we refer to isn't the same. So what you have done is talk to writers, which I think is amazing, right? Like it's like the page is where you start. You guys publish research, you do panels, you host talks. Can I just ask, like, since we're talking about storytelling, what's a big plot twist that the Entertainment Initiative has faced in trying to change these norms?
Well, a couple things I think have come up. So one is sort of a pervasive belief that people just want escapism. And particularly in this time, they want like non
Mm.
controversial escapism. And we see
Mm.
in our research that that's absolutely not true. Audiences, particularly audiences in sort of the older Gen X, younger millennial camp, um, want to see what they're experiencing reflected on screen. And even younger folks, the 18 to 24-year-olds, the younger, the sort of younger Gen Z folks, they want to see what's around the corner, and they know from their own families, what they've seen their parents or their grandparents or others in their lives go through, and so they want to see these experiences reflected on screen, not necessarily in a serious way. So humor and levity, suspense, these are all like important elements, but some core of real life circumstances are very important to folks. For Gen X, they're dealing with lots of I am Gen X, dealing with lots of caregiving for loved ones. They want to see those things reflected, and people who have find parenting and caregiving storylines relatable, often because they've experienced them themselves, are even more excited to see these stories on screen. I think the other sort of thing that we face, and the plot twist to it, is the idea that showing two parent working families, showing what the struggles look like, and also pivoting towards solutions, including solutions like people looking for and finding childcare and paid leave, or stories that sort of underscore the power of civic engagement in winning changed circumstances. These are powerful to people. They're not controversial. We surveyed viewers, looked at viewers' political party affiliation and views on gender, and even folks with conservative views want to see stories about how people are making their lives work today, and that includes into parent working families. They want to see single parent families and multi generational households, but they also strongly believe that the government needs to do more to support people with caregiving responsibilities, families with children, and that the economy, families, and communities would be more stable if we had policies like paid leave, childcare, and elder care in place.
So that's kind of like, so one plot twist is that writers and execs are often saying things like, well, we don't want to rock the boat.
And to
People
be
want
clear, it's
escapism.
like
Yeah,
mostly executives and folks who are running media
right.
companies who believe that
Show winners.
escapism is the way to go and don't want to be controversial. I think
Right.
writers are a different
Are,
audience, and they're often like writing from their own experiences and are more willing to grapple with and are
yeah.
interested in reality and in hard things.
But then the other plot twist was your research saying like actually conservative people do want to see this stuff too. That's pretty
Yeah,
cool because the thing that brought us
yeah,
together is that Jessica Clarko's book Holding It Together, How Women Became America's Safety Net, it focuses on a conservative area of America and talks about the problems that low class, middle class women are going through. Actually, every class of women go through to try and hold it all together with childcare, family care, and that was the thing that really struck me. Is like, yeah, this affects a lot of conservative women too. Obviously, a lot of us have families.
yeah.
Um, so tell me about this research that's coming out.
Yeah, well, and I want to also say it also affects men, and
Word.
this pivots to the research, but also men face tremendous like internalized and external pressure to like be providers, but they also want to be with their children. They also want to be with their partners, and we often talk about these issues as sort of women's issues, and I think that's part of what siloed them. And so I very much, I'm an evangelist for thinking about work and family as and family caregiving as things that humans do and should be able to do. So that it is true that women are doing more unpaid caregiving, are the sort of default American wife, as my friend and a former Council of Economic Advisors economist has written in her book Finding Time, my friend Heather Boucher. But men want to be able to do these things too, and are equally hurt by stereotypical gender expectations and gender norms.
Wait, that's like a record scratch for me. So men are equally hurt by these gender norms. How?
Because they too want to be providing care. They feel held back by a lack of policy support. They feel constrained by cultural expectations that they're going to be the
Yes.
provider and the breadwinner.
Yes.
Um, they it is true that the sort of we've heard about the motherhood wage gap, so women's wages go down when they become parents, men's wages go up, but that's not necessarily a good thing for a man's psyche or for the way that he might want to be spending his time,
Yeah.
which is caring for children or being there for a parent who's sick, for example. And we have this idea in our heads that women are the ones that are doing these things because historically they have been more likely to do these things and they are still more likely to do these things. But part of the reason they're more likely to do these things is that they tend to be paid less. So it's less expensive for, a daughter or a sibling, a sister or a wife or a woman to be the one providing care. And so all of these like unvirtuous cycles just reinforce one another and are hurting everybody.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that because it makes me think about the times that I've met and interacted with um, stay-at-home dads, primary parent fathers, right? Like my mom would always say, like, there's an A parent and a B parent. That's not always the man or the
Yep.
woman. And just like I've met, and my friend got married recently at this beautiful house, and the people who hosted it let her use it as the wedding venue. And I was like, first of all, that's genius. Save money because it's a really nice big house. And I was asking the husband of the family that lives there, I was like, oh, what do you do? And he like, I think he did a good job. He said it like, he's like, oh, I'm a house husband. Like he didn't sound, you could feel it, it felt rehearsed, like that I have to not sound embarrassed. But I think there is definitely a
Yeah.
sense of embarrassment for men about that choice. And hopefully that's one piece of representation I'd love to see more in media is like the
Yeah.
primary parent being the man. Yeah.
Which pivots to our research, actually, which you asked about, which is,
Yes.
yeah, men are eager to see themselves reflected on screen. And we had like a lot of 60 something percent of viewers who wanted to see different types of family structures and households represented. And we had several verbatim open ended response comments that said, I'd like to see the dad be the primary parent. I'd like to see a single father represented on screen that's managing work and family. I'd like to see a stay at home dad. Um, and yeah, that's, it's still a small share of men, but it's a growing share of men, and it's, surprisingly underrepresented.
Yeah, and like that permission, if a mainstream show had a main hot character who did this and was unashamed and could portray it, that subconsciously gives us a lot of permission as a society. And there's a lot of family dynamics where that would make the most sense, right? And I think yeah, men feel held back. That's so interesting. I just want to stop and remind everyone that this podcast is brought to you by Yo-Yo's. You Own Your Own Stories, a documentary storytelling company that demystifies cutting edge technology with emotional human stories. If you've got a cool story to share, we can help you get it out there. So, Vicki, what's something that you wish people knew? So, not just your specific audience, just generic people, America.
I mean, I think the most important thing that I want people to know is that if you are feeling stressed about managing work and family obligations and your own personal mental health and physical health issues, if you are feeling like finances are stretched and like you're unable to take care of yourself or others because you're worried about money or you're worried about losing a job, you are not alone. And this is not your personal failing. This is a structural um, insufficiency and failures that we have as a country, and that it doesn't have to be like this. And then I also want people to know that often people think that they need to go to Sweden or Europe, some other places in Europe or other countries to find a more supportive culture. And that's not the case. We actually, I mean, it is the case. And we also have a number of states in the United States that have experimented with policies like paid family and medical leave. We have 13 states plus the District of Columbia that have passed these policies. And we've learned a lot about how to structure them so that new parents are able to take care of the baby, so that family members are able to take a parent or another loved one to chemo or be with them in their final days, or so people themselves can get the health care that they need or recover from a serious health issue. These are policies that are in place and are working some places here, and yet we are playing a geography lottery and a boss lottery, and it doesn't have to be that way. There are states in the US that have invested in childcare and are starting to see results, like Vermont and New Mexico. And we can do this. We have a long term care insurance program in Washington state. We have some other innovations elsewhere. And so, yeah, we deserve more. And
We deserve more.
we
And
need to
it
shift
doesn't have to be
narratives
this way,
to
right?
believe that. Yeah, it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to hold it together. You don't have to be on your own.
I mean, we've already changed society so much. Our society is flexible and changeable. It actually reminds me of something my therapist said. She had to remind me that like our brains are neuroplastic. We have neuroplasticity is real. Like we can sometimes if we feel like things are stuck and fixed, that's not true. Like they are
Right.
changeable. I mean, a great example is women's rights. Even though they're backsliding dramatically at the moment, they had a huge jump in the past 100 years, and like things can change. Um, but I like one thing that really stood out to me from the panel that you were on, and this was with SAG, was like the idea of the specificity and like those specific, hyper specific stories and experiences. I'm thinking about dying for sex and her friend's giant bag, like the giant bag
Mm-hmm.
that she rummages through, like those super specific moments. What are some of your favorite super specific moments in TV that have done a great job of exemplifying the stuff you want to talk about and you think is important to share.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned Grey's Anatomy before.
Yeah.
They have a child care center in the hospital. They've had dialogue where Joe, who was at the time a single parent, was helping to deliver or like prep a mother to be for childbirth, and the she said, "I'm a single parent," to the patient. "I'm a single parent too," and the patient said, like, "How do you make this work?" And she was like, "My employer provides childcare." I thought that was really important to recognize. They also do a really nice job having parents of all genders drop moms and dads, drop kids off at childcare and pick them up, which is like, often, I think even in earlier seasons, you would see somebody drop a kid off and you would never see them get picked up. They have just like relatable conversations about who's getting the yogurt and who is, doing this other task related to parenting and running a household. And I really appreciate that they show those small moments because that helps to shift culture. Your audio went out, Cameron.
That is in no small part because the showrunner of Grey's Anatomy is a black woman who cares about how care conversations are had and like is aware of that, I think. And
Oh,
that
she was.
probably
Yeah, it was Zoe Clapp.
yeah,
And now it's Meg Marinus. Yeah.
yeah. But like, the idea of like that's a Shondaland
Well,
production and
that's
like
that's from Shonda from the beginning. They had conversations about equal pay,
mhm,
and other, sort of how women, they've created a universe where women of color are integrated and people of color are integrated into a hospital in ways that they haven't. I think on the pit, you mentioned the pit,
yeah.
um, super like a great, like, yeah, great representation of mothers who are managing work and family with the McKay character, for example.
And I
Um,
love the sickle cell moment as well for that. It's like
yeah,
so educational. They showed like institutional bias and then how you overcome that. And it was just like I got educated through fun and
right,
edutainment, right? Like they
right,
slipped in. But I think what I'm getting from you that's really striking me is it's not about like forcing a perspective. It's about just like including these aspects of life, right?
right. And it's just about, yeah, making things that are invisible or implied more explicit. So, for example, research from the Gina Davis Institute and Moms First tells us that when a show on TV has a kid that's under 12 years old, childcare is only discussed about 20% of the time, or in 20% of shows. And in real families, childcare for kids is discussed 100% of the time, most
Yeah.
likely. So it's just making some of those moments that are maybe less important to moving a story forward. Although I will say, like, not always, and in some cases they make the story more interesting. It's making them explicit. And what our research shows is that people want to see this sort of granular, like, everyday experience reflected. 79% of the viewers in our survey of 1,300 or so streaming viewers said that characters are more relatable to them when they face work family circumstances similar to the viewer's own.
Yeah. I think like relatability and realism is something that TV can do. I think a lot about my friend Chelsea, who whenever I talk to her child, she has two kids now, both very young, 3 and 1, and like childcare is like such a big part of their life that they uprooted their life and moved from Atlanta back to the hometown where I'm from because of that. Like that completely changed their life. Pure. I mean, I'm gonna say
Right.
one like the number one factor was to be proximal to grandparents, proximal to her parents, and like that would not have happened. I don't know if it would have happened if childcare was like an easy and provided part of their life. I just remember being like, this was like every time I talked to her, it's like it would come up, and she's not a complainer and never has been. So I just remember being like,
Yeah.
wow, this is like huge issue affecting both of them. It costs more than rent for them to get their one child, and then they're both getting sick all the time. Of course, that's just a part of childcare, but yeah, I just remember thinking like, wow, this is like a driving force. So if you're writing a character who has kids, I'm pretty sure it would be a driving force in the character's life. So do you like
Right.
go into writer's room and host events and be like, hey guys, remember parents have children? Or are you mostly trying to talk to the execs and the showrunners and trying
We're
to make
doing
it
both.
top down? Yeah.
Yeah, so we're doing both. And all of those stakeholders are important. Execs greenlight shows and review the dialogue and suggest cuts. and suggest edits. So it's important for them to understand what this, like, how audiences engage with characters in a heightened way when they're more relatable, and what relatability and realism means. And we want to equip writers with the research and data in the real world that might help to inform their characters in culturally relevant ways as well. So yeah, we're doing both.
Yeah. What would you say? Just coming back to like good examples. You got me to watch High Potential, and I think about there's in the very first episode there's a big discussion of how the next door neighbor is like their interim childcare, and she like thanks him, and she like
Yeah,
there's like that. And then what convinced me was what you said is like the end of the first episode she negotiates a salary that includes paid childcare and extra leave.
yeah,
That's like perfection, right? Like almost giving people a talk track in a way to emulate, right? Like, hey, you can do
right.
this
And of
too.
course, not everyone can do that.
Yeah, that's
Um,
true. That's true.
but yeah, the example of somebody saying my childcare costs a lot of money, and if you want me to work here, I need money for childcare. Like that, I thought that was incredibly powerful. I was so excited when I saw that. And they continued throughout the first season on High Potential to weave in um, kind of depictions of showing Caitlin Olsen's character, Morgan, at work and at home. Her children were sort of always present in her mind. Her ex husband, who ended up being her paid childcare provider, which I thought was an interesting choice,
Mm-hmm.
um, faces his own work family, his own stress of like needing to work and watch these kids and feel like he needs to be perfect. And so, it was never the main point at all. It was not the A story, but it was a B and C story throughout the first episode, and just like a feature of the first season, I'm sorry, and just like a feature of what this show is about in ways that are incredibly human and humorous and real.
It's perfectly said. So, my last question for you, Vicky, is if you were a fortune teller, what would be your most, I want to say outlandish prediction, but what would be your most powerful prediction for the future of care representation, specifically in TV?
Well, hopefully, the work that we're doing and that others are doing, and the research and the data that shows both a business case, a social impact case, and a creative case for including more authentic and more aspirational representation of how working people are living their lives and managing work and family, and showing people of whatever their gender navigating these things sets an example, for Hollywood itself, so that shows that do these things well get replicated. Hollywood loves repetition and sort of like taking what's old and making it new again. And so this just becomes a piece of storytelling that's expected. And more than
Mm.
that, that storytelling helps to inform what's expected in our broader culture and in our policy landscape as well.
Yeah, that this becomes a successful model. Yeah, that care stories and inclusion of care stories becomes like the superhero of television, like like this like replicatable model that makes money, right? Because it is a business. So I hear what you're saying. You have to make a business case that people want to see this, people will tune in, people will share it. Um, I think a lot of people, in my personal experience, a lot of people watched and shared Caring Dying for Sex because of proximity to people who have cancer. Would you agree with that?
Yeah,
I just feel like
I,
I've had that conversation, right? So it's
it
like
wouldn't
when
be
you talk,
surprising to me. Yeah.
yeah, you need research to back it up. That's my feeling. But like when you talk about things that matter to people, they'll share it if it's
Right.
relevant.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, the other like really interesting point in our research that we found is that 87% of people said that viewers said that a show with a work family theme caused them to do something, including recommending a show to others, help them understand themselves better, help them understand somebody else better, help them start a conversation. And that too was true among people who sort of skewed more progressive and people who skewed more conservative. So I think the other piece of this is that in a really divided time, these stories also have the capacity to create bridges and to bring people together. And that is also a really powerful feature of entertainment.
Well, thank you for building a bridge to the end of this episode. Vicky, you're amazing. And thank you for listening to Cool, Cool, Cool. I'm Cameron Kitt from Yo-Yo's. a huge shout out to Vicki Shabo. You can find a link to the page around the entertainment initiative called Rescripting Gender Work, Family and Care in the show notes. Of course, you can always go check out the show and let us know what you thought of the episode on social media using the hashtag #CoolCoolPodcast. Vicki, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me, Cameron.